This is my disclaimer. This is my first carb job on something this small. I did a 4-barrel for a car a few years ago and it never ran the same. It was terrible. I say this to let you know you don't need a lot of experience to do this. It's pretty simple. It's a small carburetor. I do not know the specifications on the torque or anything for this. This was all done just from scratch. But common sense goes a long way. Most of this video is in picture form with voiceover. I did this so it is easier for you to pause it and get a good look at the picture of what I'm saying. Okay, this is a Craftsman 826 wheel drive. Taking off the carburetor. To take the cover off, you have 2 screws here. You're supposed to have one up here, mine is missing. And on the left side, you have another one here, and there's one missing up top there. And then over here, this knob just pulls off. And this here, where, where your key goes, is a nut. Just take that nut and washer off, and then it just pops off. I took pictures of everything so I knew exactly where all the linkages go. There are 2 bolts up here that hold the intake on. Once those are off, the entire carburetor just comes loose. You do have the gas line back here, which needs to be disconnected from here. And this is the line. Make sure your gas tank is empty, otherwise as soon as it disconnects, it's just going to drain all the fuel right on the ground. Kind of learned that one the hard way. I'm just going to disassemble these linkages here. There's only one linkage actually left. There was another hose going to this little knob here, and that's this one here. It has to be disconnected. So this hose here, this gas line here, and this linkage, and these 2 bolts here. Otherwise it just pops back into place. So now I'm going to disconnect this linkage, which looks really easy to do. It's just a clip. I'm using an old toothbrush and carb cleaner to clean this. You take out the 2 bolts holding the intake on. Odds are the gasket's going to get wrecked. Use a razor blade or a scraper to clean off all the gasket. I gave the car a quick cleaning before doing anything in a 4-liter ice cream bucket. I started with the choke bracket, which has 2 screws, which I removed, and then it just came apart, and then I dropped it in the bucket. Then I move on to the bowl, which is an 11mm wrench on this model. Under the bowl is the float, which is held in with a pin. Needle nose pliers work best to remove it. You remove the float. If you want, you can put it in some gasoline, make sure it floats, because if it doesn't float, it's not doing its job. Once the float is removed, you will see a little needle with a piece of wire attached to it. You need to pull it out nice and slow, and you need to keep it. Next, you take the bracket for the cover off. You have to take this off in order to get that screw behind it off. Now when you remove these 2 screws, count how many turns it takes so you can put them in the same amount of turns. The nut that got unscrewed from the bowl, you have to take the screw out of it and see how it goes together, or at least clean it up. You can take the rubber seal off at any time and then soak the whole carburetor. Give it a good soaking. After you're done scrubbing it, the best thing to do is to spray it with air. High compressed air from an air compressor works great. Now once all the gasket is cleaned off, it's time to make a gasket, and it's very easy to do. You cut a small chunk of gasket maker to the size of the flange. Once you have the right size piece, just drill a hole through each one of the holes. Then put the bolts through, which will tighten the gasket maker up to the flange. Then you take an X-Acto knife and carefully cut out the middle. Then you take a sharp pair of scissors and cut around the edges. Remember, you got to do this twice, one for each end. So now you put the new gasket on for the bowl. Then you put the needle in. I had a problem with the new one and had to go back to using the old one to make sure the carburetor would work. This is why you always keep your old parts. You just never know. So now you put the float in there, line up the pin, put the pin into it. Then you put the bowl on the bottom. The bowl has a shallow part. That shallow part goes underneath the pin that's holding the float in. Then you screw in the nut that has the screw in it, nice and tight. I do not know the specs on any of this, so you just use common sense, not too tight to strip it, not too loose so it leaks. Then you put back the idle and mixture screws, the same amount of turns as it was in order to take them out. Then you put the bracket for the cover back on and the bracket for the choke back on. Then you take one of the gaskets you made, put it on the end of the intake, put the bolts through it, attach it to the carburetor, and start to tighten it up. I wasn't paying attention when I put it back together, and you can see the bowl is on the top. It's supposed to be on the bottom. So I had to take it apart and do it again. So be careful and take your time. There's only one linkage. The first thing you do is connect it. Then you connect the gas line. A set of bent needle nose pliers works very good for that, but a regular set of pliers will work also. Then you put the two bolts for the intake manifold in and tighten them up. Then you attach your primer line. It has no clamps, you got to make sure it's on there good and solid. Give everything a once over, make sure it's nice and tight. Once you're convinced it is, try to start it before putting the cover back on in case you have to make some adjustments, which you probably will. Now the carburetor's been rebuilt, and it starts very easy. You turn the key on. I hit the primer once. Turn the gas on to hot for about medium. One pull. A little more primer.